The courtroom is packed. The air is thick with tension. A black man in a sharp suit sits calmly at the defendant's table, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. Across from him, a uniformed police officer shifts in his seat, his confidence clear, maybe a little too clear. The officer smirks slightly, knowing the system is on his side. After all, who's going to believe a black man over a cop? The judge calls for order and the trial begins. The officer takes a stand, swearing to tell the truth. His words come out smooth, rehearsed, too perfect. He describes a scene that paints the defendant as aggressive, non-compliant, even dangerous. His voice carries weight, authority. The jury listens intently, but something isn't right. The defendant doesn't flinch, doesn't object. He just watches. Then, when his turn finally comes, he stands up, straightens his tie, and begins to speak. The energy in the room shifts. His words are sharp, precise. He starts poking holes in the officer's story, one by one. The officer's face changes, his confidence cracking. What he doesn't know is that the man he falsely accused isn't just any defendant. He's a legal genius, and he's about to expose everything. The courtroom is silent now, the weight of the moment settling over everyone. The defendant, Marcus Reed, takes slow, measured steps toward the witness stand. He doesn't rush. He doesn't need to. Every eye in the room is on him, curious, skeptical, waiting. The officer, Sergeant Bill Dawson, clears his throat, shifting slightly in his seat. His confidence, once solid, now wavers just a bit. Marcus finally speaks. "Sergeant Dawson," he says, his voice steady, controlled. "You said I was resisting arrest." He pauses, letting the words hang in the air. The officer nods, his expression firm. "That's right," he replies. Marcus tilts his head slightly, as if considering something. Then he continues, his tone still calm. "You also claimed I reached into my pocket in a threatening manner, correct?" Dawson hesitates for half a second before answering. "Yes." A small smile flickers across Marcus's face. "Interesting," he says, "because the police report you filed tells a different story." He walks over to the table, picks up a document, and holds it up for the jury. "Right here, you stated I never reached into my pocket, just stood there." A murmur ripples through the courtroom. Dawson shifts again, his jaw tightening. Marcus doesn't stop. And the body cam footage. He lets the question linger. "Oh, wait, there isn't any, because somehow yours malfunctioned that night." His eyes lock onto Dawson's, unblinking. The officer swallows hard. "Technical issues happen," he mutters. Marcus nods, his expression unreadable. "Sure, they do. But what's odd is that 2 other officers on the scene also had technical issues with their cameras that night." He takes a slow step forward. "What are the chances?" The room is electric now. Even the judge leans forward slightly. Marcus isn't just poking holes in Dawson's story, he's unraveling it. And for the first time, the officer looks genuinely nervous. Because Marcus isn't just defending himself, he's exposing the truth. And the worst part for Dawson, this is only the beginning. Sergeant Dawson forces a stiff smile, but there's a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He's been in court before, plenty of times. But this is different. The defendant isn't stumbling through some public defender's rushed defense. Marcus Reed knows exactly what he's doing. And worse, he knows exactly what to ask. The prosecutor shifts uncomfortably in his seat. He was expecting an easy case, another routine conviction. But now he's watching his star witness sweat. Marcus picks up another document from the table and holds it up. "This," he says, his voice measured, "is the official dispatch log from that night." He takes a slow step closer. "It shows you radioed in a hostile suspect before you even stepped out of your car." He lets that sit for a second. "Before you even saw me." Dawson's jaw tightens. "That's procedure," he says, but the words lack the same force they had earlier. Marcus nods. "Sure, but then, why does the log say you called for backup a full 3 minutes before our interaction?" He tilts his head, studying the officer. Almost like you knew exactly how you wanted this to go. A few members of the jury exchange glances. The tension in the courtroom is thick now, hanging heavy over every word. The judge leans forward slightly but doesn't interrupt. He wants to see where this is going. Marcus turns and looks directly at the jury. And what's even more interesting, he holds up another paper. This is the report from the officer who arrived on the scene. He takes his time unfolding it. And it contradicts nearly everything Sergeant Dawson said. He exhales sharply. So, either we have two different realities, or someone's lying. Dawson's face is stone, but his fingers tap anxiously against the table. He opens his mouth, but before he can speak, Marcus lifts a hand. Oh, and one more thing, he says, eyes locked on Dawson. The witness you conveniently left out of your statement. He gestures to the back of the courtroom. They're here today. Gasps ripple through the room. The officer's face drains of color. Marcus remains calm, his expression unreadable. He's not done yet, not even close. The heavy silence in the courtroom stretches as every head turns toward the back. A man rises slowly from his seat. He's older, dressed in a modest button-down and slacks, but his presence is commanding. His expression is steady, unreadable, much like Marcus's. Sergeant Dawson shifts in his seat, his fingers tightening around the armrest. For the first time, his carefully maintained confidence is cracking. His eyes dart toward the prosecutor, searching for reassurance, but there's none to be found. Marcus lets the tension settle before speaking again. Mr. Turner, he says, addressing the witness. You were there that night, weren't you? The man nods. I was. Marcus steps closer, his voice sharp but controlled. And did you see me acting aggressively? Did you see me resisting arrest? Turner shakes his head. No, I saw the opposite. A ripple moves through the jury box. The prosecutor shifts again, but he doesn't object. Maybe because he knows it won't help. Marcus turns back to Dawson. So, let me get this straight, he says, pacing slowly. Your body cam wasn't working. The two other officers on the scene also had camera malfunctions. The official dispatch log doesn't match your statement. And now we have an eyewitness saying your entire version of events was a lie. He stops and looks directly at Dawson. Tell me, Sergeant, what are the chances of all these coincidences happening at once? Dawson swallows hard, but before he can respond, Marcus lifts a finger. And before you answer that, he says, reaching into his briefcase, there's one more thing I'd like the court to see. He pulls out a small USB drive and holds it up. The courtroom seems to shrink, everyone leaning in. Marcus takes his time, letting the moment build. Because, despite all the malfunctioning cameras that night, he plugs the USB into the courtroom's display system. Someone was recording. Dawson's breath catches. The prosecutor's face turns pale, and the entire courtroom braces for what's about to be revealed. The courtroom is so silent, you could hear a pin drop. All eyes are locked on the screen as Marcus clicks the file. For a split second, the video is dark. Then, the grainy footage comes to life. The angle is low, shaky, like someone was recording from a phone hidden. But the audio is crystal clear. A voice cuts through the silence. Asterisk, asterisk, Dawson's voice, asterisk, asterisk. Just another punk who thinks he's smart. The officer's voice sneers from the speakers. The timestamp on the video is from that night, just minutes before Marcus's arrest. The air shifts, thick with shock. The footage continues. Dawson is standing near his squad car, speaking to another officer. Don't worry about the camera, he says. We already know how this goes. He'll run his mouth. I'll handle it, and we'll write it up how we need to. Gasps ripple through the courtroom. A juror leans forward, eyes wide. The judge's expression hardens. Dawson's face drains of color. That's taken out of context, he stammers, but his voice lacks conviction. He looks toward the prosecutor, but the man only rubs his temples, eyes fixed on the screen. Marcus doesn't look away. Funny thing about the truth, Sergeant, he says, pausing the video at the moment Dawson's face is in full view. It always finds a way out. Dawson shakes his head, panic creeping into his features. But Marcus isn't done. He steps closer to the jury, his voice steady. This isn't just about me, he says. How many other people were written up the way you needed it to go? How many times did your camera malfunction when the truth wasn't convenient? The weight of the question lingers. The judge exhales sharply, finally breaking the silence. Sergeant Dawson, he says, his tone grave, I suggest you choose your next words carefully. And just when it seems like Dawson has no way out, the courtroom door suddenly swings open. A young officer rushes in, face flushed, clutching a folder in his hands. Your Honor, he says breathlessly, there's something you need to see. Marcus lifts an eyebrow. Dawson clenches his fists. The tension spikes once more, because whatever is in that folder, it might change everything. The young officer stands at the front of the courtroom, gripping the folder so tightly his knuckles turn white. His eyes dart between the judge, Marcus, and Sergeant Dawson, who looks like he's barely holding himself together. The judge leans forward. What is it, officer? His voice is firm, but there's an edge of curiosity. The officer hesitates, then glances at Marcus before swallowing hard. It's an internal investigation report, Your Honor, just completed this morning. He holds out the folder. The prosecutor, looking even more uncomfortable than before, takes it and quickly flips through the pages. As he reads, his face turns pale. Marcus watches him, arms crossed, waiting. The prosecutor clears his throat, shifting in his seat. Your Honor, this document shows multiple complaints against Sergeant Dawson for falsified reports, excessive force, and misconduct. He pauses, then exhales slowly. And all of them were dismissed by the same superior officer. A murmur spreads through the room. Dawson's jaw clenches, but his eyes betray fear. Marcus steps forward, his voice cutting through the noise. And let me guess, this superior officer just so happens to be someone who benefits from keeping Dawson on the streets. The prosecutor hesitates before nodding. His direct supervisor. Marcus lets the weight of those words sink in before turning back to Dawson. So it's bigger than just you. His tone is calm, but there's fire behind it. This wasn't just about me that night. It was about power, about control. He takes another step closer. And now it's all coming apart. Dawson looks around desperately, searching for an escape, but there isn't one. The evidence is too strong. The witness testimony, the video, and now this report, it's over. The judge finally speaks, his voice heavy. Sergeant Dawson, based on this evidence, I have no choice but to order an immediate review of your conduct. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending further investigation. Gasps ripple through the room. Dawson shakes his head, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. This is a setup, he shouts. You don't understand. But before he can finish, the courtroom doors open again. This time, 2 more officers step inside. They walk directly toward Dawson, their expressions unreadable. One of them holds out a pair of handcuffs. Sergeant Dawson, he says, you need to come with us. The room is frozen in shock. Dawson looks like he wants to fight it, to argue that there's nothing left to say. Slowly, he stands, his face tight with rage. The cuffs click around his wrists. As he's led away, Marcus exhales. The tension, the weight of the trial, it finally settles. He turns to the jury, then to the judge, and finally to Mr. Turner, the witness who made all the difference. He gives a small nod. But just as it seems like everything is over, the young officer who brought the report hesitates. Then he looks directly at Marcus. There's something else, he says carefully. Dawson wasn't working alone. The room goes still again. Marcus studies him for a moment, then folds his arms. So who else is part of this? The officer hesitates before answering. You're not gonna believe it. Marcus watches the young officer carefully. The entire courtroom seems to be holding its breath, waiting. Dawson is already in handcuffs, his head hanging low, but now there's something bigger, something still hidden. The officer finally speaks. We just got confirmation. The supervisor who kept clearing Dawson's misconduct reports. He's under investigation too. He hesitates before adding, and he's not the only one. There's a pattern, multiple cases, multiple officers, all connected. A heavy silence follows. The prosecutor rubs his face, clearly overwhelmed. The judge exhales sharply and shakes his head. This is far from over, he says. Marcus nods, taking it all in. He didn't just prove his own innocence today. He pulled back the curtain on something much larger. But he also knows this fight isn't finished. There are more cases, more people who never got the chance to defend themselves. As Dawson is led out of the courtroom, Marcus turns to Mr. Turner, the witness who had the courage to speak up. "Thank you," he says sincerely. Turner just nods, his expression thoughtful. Outside, as Marcus steps into the fresh air, reporters rush toward him, shouting questions. He takes a deep breath. "This wasn't just about me," he says firmly. "This was about truth, and truth always wins." He walks away, leaving behind the chaos, but not the fight. Because now, people are listening, and that means change is finally coming.